color is a universe. And if you're sensitive enough, you could tap into it because then it gets into you. You know, music gets into your soul, colors get into your soul. Painting paintings, which are like kind of me with a paintbrush on a canvas, is like a language that I really know and love, and it's really familiar. So it allows me to be relatively calm while I'm processing. There's always what's in my head, and conversations in my head, and then there's the painting in front of me, which is often a very different conversation. But I don't know if you've ever been, like, I don't know, it's a kind of weird thing, but my head, like sometimes my mind runs really fast and I'm like in 20 different places at the same time. And then you're having a conversation, but the conversation, you have to be extremely present with it. So I found these tricks to like stay present while letting my mind run. And painting is one of those. So the painting is a conversation. There's like a materiality and all of those things, a hope, an execution, and then there's where my mind is going. And then the music, usually I'll put on music because the music is a good way of like not allowing the thoughts to get too crazy. And because it hits my soul in a different way. It actually came as a funny thought, a couple funny thoughts. I was in Barbados a couple years ago during Barbados independence, and my favorite thing is watching the sunset over the ocean. It's like watching the sunset over the sea and watching the sunset over New York City skylines are my two favorite things. It immediately, no matter what headspace I'm in, it takes me out of it and then makes me be really present. And I was in Barbados, and I did this show at the Tate, and I was thinking about Turner and his landscape paintings, and then Rothko had made his paintings in relationship to Turner, and of course those are landscape paintings, and I wanted to make some landscape paintings, but I thought it would be uninteresting in the Duveen, which is really a space for sculpture and installation. And the show at the Tate was so personal and really made me build up a lot of walls that I hadn't had because I had to deal with a lot of things that I hadn't thought about explicitly. There's this rapper, Ghostface Killer, and he had this song, All That I Got Is You. It's really one of my favorite songs. It's one of the most important songs in my life. And I actually have it tatted on my hand. And Ghost had performed for an opening that I had at this Gallery Blum and Poe in LA. And he doesn't perform the song anymore, but I remember him listening to it and talking about that song. He said, people really love that song, but I can't perform it because it just brings me back to a place. And I got it because immediately after the Tate show, I just couldn't really negotiate making anything pseudo personal, like even remotely personal. I just needed it to be as like. And one of the things I really love about Rothko is, and I've said this a couple times, but he was a Jewish immigrant who immigrated to America right after during the time of the Holocaust, and listened to jazz music and painted this landscape paintings, and it was really about like, it was hard for it was like, I think for me impossible to think that he's not thinking about the Holocaust, and so he painted these landscape paintings, these fuzzy landscape paintings, and I needed a way back outside of myself, and so I started painting these sunset paintings as a way to kind of get back into it. I think my grandma's love has formed me to be the person I am today. I mean, I was really her favorite person, and she made it publicly known that I was her favorite person. Even to the rest of the family, everybody knew it, and I got away with everything. I did things that I definitely shouldn't have been doing at the age that I was doing it, and she always had all this space for me, and maybe too much space actually, because my aunt Heather had to pull me back in sometimes because I was just, not going to school, playing football with my friends, forcing my friends to cut school, stuff like that. And then when I went to America, I think it's funny that there's police cars passing by, but there was just a lot of over-policing in the community that I was in. It was a era of the crack epidemic in the 80s and 90s, and that meant a lot of different things happened in the community. And so it's really interesting going from island where everybody in Grenada is really small. It's 100,000 people, maybe at that time, maybe 150, I don't know. And everybody knows everybody. It's really small. Like if I was cutting school, somebody would see me and see my uniform because I went to a Catholic school. And they would be a complete stranger and bring me to school. And they would say, things like, "Oh, who's your mom?" I'd be like, "Miss Frederica." And then the next thing you know, this random stranger who just brought me to school I would come home and they would have tea. They would be having tea with my grandma. So it was like really a village, in that sense of the word. And New York was a huge city. I mean, I really explored. I went sort of in the streets all the time, and it was really interesting to go everywhere from the Bronx to Brooklyn to wherever. But it was really, the magic of New York is really amazing in that I always tell this story, but New York is magical because it happens in the streets. I was like, it's not like LA where people are in the car or places where people are in houses. All the interesting things happen on the streets, at least when I was young. And but it also was like there's so many people people are working that people could kind of allow you to be yourself, but also ignore whatever happened. Like I remember coming back from when I was living in Argentina, coming back to New York, and it was interesting because in Argentina, if you walk in an elevator, you have to say hi to the person. It was just like you were always expected to greet people whenever you were in their space. And I got back to New York, and I was taking the train to work, and somebody had just committed suicide and by jumping in front of a train in the train track. And the woman in front of me did the most New York thing I'd seen. She like threw her hands up and said, "Fuck, now I'm be late for work." Couldn't they wait one more train? And she got so upset that they didn't wait one more train to do what they were gonna do. And I always thought that's very New York. You know, it's like people, at least the New York that I knew, they don't care what you do, just, as long as it doesn't bother them. And that means that it was the art world that I loved, where an Andy Warhol could be an Andy Warhol, because that guy was a weird guy. But so many people could be the weirdest versions of themselves in New York. And in small villages, there's a different type of policing. The policing is like, you can't change too much, because then it disrupts the harmony of the small village. But in a big city, you could change all you want. You could really reinvent yourself in the craziest way. But there isn't the type of intimacy that's in a small village, And so those two eras formed me. The type of like need to radically invent myself, reimagine myself, but also like a deep need for intimacy. The era I grew up in, it was like what people today call the golden era of hip hop. It was like in New York, you would see like, it was a really unique era, because you couldn't become a big musician if your neighborhood didn't like fuck with your music. So, and the way you did that was like you would have to rap at the corner of the block for everybody. So being a kid in those, you would hear like, oh, Busta's rapping on Flatbush. Oh, Jay-Z's rapping over there, or Biggie's rapping over there. And, nobody wanted me to rap. I wasn't very, my mind runs faster than my words could come out of my mouth. So I just never felt like I had that gift. I would like stumble on my words, and you have to have like there's like an incredible magic that has to happen between your ability to like invent metaphors on the spot, have ideas that kind of form together, your ability to go back to a word that you said 5 words ago to rhyme it. My mind moves too fast for that. I'm not very good at those stuff. So I just never had the gift of music. But painting slowed me down. And then I grew up where all my aunts and them, when I would start drawing, I think they felt like I was doing something productive, so they gave me space to draw. I said this story to someone a few weeks ago, but also I was reminding my sister. My sister just had a baby. She was living in a studio apartment. The bathroom was outside. It was a very small, the only thing that could fit was the bed, my nephew's her son's cradle, and then there was a part on the floor. And I remember she gave me a third of. I was staying with her, and she gave me a third of the floor, of the only like part on the floor, so that I could paint and draw. I think when you get that kind of support, it comes with like a gratitude, probably. Like, it comes with like, oh, she doesn't have that much space in this place, but she's still giving it to me to paint. When I stand in front of a painting, it acts like a play. So I can see, oh, this person put some ground here, then they put a blue, and then they put an orange, and then they scrape the orange, and then they put a green. So I'm usually like, oh, and then they resolved it horizontally, but then they did this. So I'm really watching a person performing, but they're not there. It's just me watching them perform. It's like you watch a Van Gogh and you see him, and you're unpicking. Oh, he did that. It was wet, and it was really fast, but somehow he had to do it quick enough that it doesn't get messy. It doesn't get like super messy. So you have to have a kind of incredible preciseness and control. So it's like watching a movie without the noise, because then you see a long play. And that's really exciting for me. I don't know. It just fits my temperament. I could sit 8 hours in front of a painting and then kind of have a play. But it also lets me like get into my own head and come right back. So it's not like if I'm watching a movie, if I take 10 minutes or 5 seconds to think about something, I might have missed the plot. Or 5 seconds to think about the song, I might have missed. So time-based things are really artworks it's not the best for me because I have to be extremely focused the whole time. And if you're watching a great movie, you might miss something. But in painting, I can dip in and out of my own thoughts, and kind of the painting hasn't changed. So it works really well for me. It's kind of like wired in a weird way. Colors are interesting because I think you see, but there's ways in which you feel it. Like there's these two artists that I've like cried in front of. It was Rothko and this Korean artist Yoon, and really it's just color. But I think color could operate in painting. It's actually the most quintessential tool, because it's the moment you pick something up, you're picking a color, whether it's black, white, whatever. And so color is kind of the most interesting thing to work through as a painter. And I think there's a color. I was watching Belly, which is this 90s movie starring DMX and hip hop, directed by Hype Williams, who used to make all these music videos. And there's this scene where it's Nas. When Nas talks, the scene is reddish. And when DMX talks, the scene is like a deep, dark blue. And they would go back and forth between Nas talking to T-Boz, his girlfriend, and he has a baby, and and it's really, they're adults. They talk about like, and then with DMX and his girlfriend Keisha, it's dark and it's blue, and he's like, he he's it's incredible, and the way Hype use colors to differentiate the tone of these two personalities and the worlds that they inhabit. I loved it. I mean, it was such an incredible movie as a teenager to be watching. And I always think color is so special. It's the most important tool in painting. I'm trying to be a better colorist, but I inherit as a New Yorker, you either got the opportunity to go to your zone school, which is usually a school within like half a mile of where you lived. And so a lot of kids went to what they would call zone schools. And then there were a few kids like myself who went to school far away from their neighborhood. And those kids like me traveled like an hour away to go to, but everybody traveled an hour away or 10 minutes. And that meant you would go to like Queens, or you go to like, the Indian community in Jackson, or the Chinese community in Flushing, or the Dominican community in Washington Heights, or whatever. And we had all these friends, and we would all like go to each other's houses, and you'd eat great food, and you'd hang out in the streets. And each of those neighborhoods had a very different feeling, like walking into social housing where a lot of my friends and I lived, depends on the weekend, but it had a very different texture. You could feel it. It's like really weird. It's really interesting. Social housing everywhere has the same texture. Just feel it. It has the same color. History is a tool. It's the tool I use to want to to decide, oh, I have the right to do something. And I feel like I have the right to do everything, but in a respectful way. I think the history of human beings for the last 150,000 years is really interesting for me. I feel like actually I am not too different from the first human being. I think the human being 80,000 years ago who lost their mother probably feels very similar to me, even though that was 80,000 years ago. The human being that had their first orgasm is probably similar to my first orgasm. So there's that, and I feel like, oh, I have a right to do all of that. I also feel like one of the fundamental parts of being a human being is trade, and that ideas are traded and evolve, and that I have a right to explore all of those ideas that was traded. And then I feel like I also grew up, the great privilege that I have is that I grew up in a culture that what was happening to me and my friends was spread through hip hop A painting's about all of it. It's about the layer that's in front of you, but it's also about like how you arrived at a solution, because the solution isn't necessarily your invention. It's an evolution of someone that came thousands of years ago. I mean, you don't get Giacometti without Egyptian sculpture. And so it allows you to go back in time, but bring time forward. Art does that because it reminds us that we are in the continuum of our ancestors thousands of years ago. And so I feel like my privilege is that I don't have to explain, I could just explore it. You know, I was listening to this Jay-Z song, 99 Problems, and there's this line where he goes, if you grew up with holes in your zapatos, I'm from the hood, stupid, what kind of facts are those? And it's really about like a misunderstanding that people ignore his biography. Critics are ignoring his biography by not looking at, oh yeah, here's a guy who grew up with holes in his shoes and I'm like, yeah, of course, I was 11 years old walking the streets with holes in my shoes. So Jay explained that for me. I'm listening to Jay add holes in my shoes and I feel seen. Like seen by music that the whole world is listening to. So it's a crazy like privilege. And I fundamentally believe that it's the greatest privilege I have. I think that there is a hatred by certain people who don't feel seen, who want me to deny my privilege and deny like what I went through and deny like that I have, that my community created such a great artistic form that the world began to listen to. And so I love it. I don't see it as a burden. I see it as a privilege. I see like, you know, the show Grace was called Grace because I was thinking about like blackness as a sort of, you know, Venus. It comes out of, you know, in the center. There's it's based off of my sister Samantha is based off Botticelli's Venus. And what's interesting about Venus, is that her evolution is that she was Ishtar in the Middle East, and when she was a mother goddess, and I'm really reducing it, she was a mother goddess, she was Mother Earth. But by the time she went over to what's today, what's the Greeks and so on, she became a daughter. She became someone who Cronus had cut off Uranus' penis, threw it in the water, and she was born this motherless child, fully birthed out of like this violent act. And I thought, in a weird way, there's a metaphor for black people being taken from Africa and who were essentially creators of whatever culture. They named themselves in Africa. They were their own communities. They were their own storytellers. They built their own nation. And then black people were taken, and then they were given this title of being black. And then they were put on these new lands. That was these lands that belonged to other people. And then they were given languages and all of that stuff. And so they became daughters to a foreigner's imagination. But by the time that I grew up in the 80s and 90s, you couldn't tell me that the culture that I grew up in wasn't the most interesting, innovative mother of all cultures. I mean, I listen to K-pop and I go, oh, I know where this came from. You know, it came from R&B. So I felt really like I grew up in this other side where my culture was the mother of things, not subservient to something else. It had like become, Venus had grown into a mother. And I just thought, oh, that mother would be Grace. And it was really an announcement. Like, I don't really think of myself as burdened by history so much, but as have inherited some of the greatest cultural innovations and been front stage at those innovations. So you know, I just yeah, I don't really feel like it's a burden so much. I do think that there's state violence, and there incredible state violence. I've had to deal with I said it, Grenada was invaded the year I was born. And I'm pretty sure if America didn't invade Grenada, my grandma and my mom would be alive right now. So the anger that I feel is usually towards state violence. But I don't feel like blackness is a burden. I feel like, or history is a burden. Because, I mean, how could I? You know, I don't know. I have a very different narrative of history. The way I think about the question why painting is in twofolds. The first is, what is the responsibility of art? And I think the responsibility of the artist is to always be honest about how they understand the world. It's not about a moral positioning. It's really, how do you see the world that you live in? And from that, then we could begin to address, well, what is the world we live in? But you can't get there if you're not honest. And the artist has a drive in them to be honest about how they understand the world. And artists are really people's way of telling the world and telling someone, oh, that thing that you just experienced, you're not crazy. Because I experienced it. Here's the song, here's the writing, here's the painting. You're not crazy. And so you could fall in love and then listen to music, and then it lets you know, oh yeah, you were gonna burn down their car? You're not crazy. Because that's what love is. You need to go burn their car down. Fuck that shit. A lot of life is performing how you are conditioned to think that you're supposed to feel this thing. Oh, you fell down? You ever watch a kid fall down and then they have no emotion, and then the parent run up to them and then force them to cry by saying, this thing happened to you, therefore you should feel like you have the right to cry? And then the kid starts crying uncontrollably for hours? I think those are how we're conditioned. We're conditioned to not be able to process what is happening to us. And art lets us process that. It lets us know, it lets us rip ourselves away from the conditioning. to explore within ourselves something different that may be more real to how we feel.